When I began collecting gospel vinyl over 20 years ago, there were some artists I did not expect to find. You don't have to be a Christian to sing gospel songs. Neither does singing gospel songs make you a Christian. We are not going to try to figure out or determine if these artists are or are not Christian. That's God's department. However, we will look at some artists who steered out of their mainstream secular lane to drop a gospel vinyl. Or maybe they steered back into it and then out, or maybe they steered over. Either way, we're going to look at them. Roy Acuff was a country music artist and a preacher's kid. According to CountryMusicHallOfFame.com, Roy Claxton Acuff came from a royal folk-based background. His father farmed while also serving as Maynardville's postmaster and pastor of the town's Baptist church. As a youth, Acuff absorbed music of all sorts, folk ballads and the fiddle tunes that he learned from the neighbors and kin, hymns he learned from the itinerant singing, school instructor recordings of early country music artists, and even some classical vocal training pursued by his sister Sue after the family moved to the Knoxville suburb of Fountain City. Roy actually recorded several gospel vinyls before his passing in 1992. One that he recorded was his self-titled Roy Acuff by Hilltop Records in 1966. Ren Grevitt from Music Business Magazine said, "Religious and inspirational song material has always occupied a key part of the Acuff repertoire. Here in this brand new Hilltop album, you'll find the qualities described by critic Shelton, who applied the brace of moving inspirational songs, many of which are close to Roy's own heart." That same year, Roy released another self-titled album through Metro. And if you like Southern-style, country-flavored bluegrass hymns, you'll love either of these albums. No doubt you know the man who walks the line, Johnny Cash. In 1962, he released the album Hymns from the Heart. 7 years later, he released a widely common album called Johnny Cash, The Holy Land. Johnny Cash had a massively popular music career in country music. It's also no secret that he struggled with an addiction, and according to Wikipedia, Cash was arrested in 1967 in Walker County, Georgia, after the police found him carrying a bag of prescription pills and was in a car accident. Cash's journey included a rediscovery of his Christian faith that took him to an altar call in Evangelical Temple, a small church in the Nashville area pastored by Reverend Jimmy Rogers Snow, the son of country music legend Hank Snow. Cash's album Holy Land was inspired by a visit to Israel, the Holy Land, with his wife June Carter Cash. And in fact, most of the album consists of on-site recordings made by Cash using a portable tape recorder during a visit, describing what he sees as visiting holy sites around Jerusalem. The soul single, Daddy Sang Bass, which reached #1 on country charts and remained in that spot for 6 weeks, was penned by Carl Perkins. In 2018, country folk music lost a legend, Roy Clark. And in 1975, Clark released an album, Roy Clark Sings Gospel. He did this through Word Records out of Waco, Texas. One of the founders of Country Music Association, CMA, said, "You've heard the pickin' side, the singing side, the blues side, the funny side, and the other side of Roy. Now hear the very special side of the incredible Roy Clark. Very special in that this album is the one that Roy has always wanted to do." 2 years after pressing this vinyl, Roy told Guidepost in 1977, "Ever since I was 16 and won the National Banjo Playing Contest, which included a trip to the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, being a successful country music performer was my #1 goal. But in 1960, at nearly the age of 30, it really began to bother me that no one had the foggiest idea of who Roy Clark was. One Sunday, during this time, Barbara and I were visiting a nearby church, and we felt very much at home there. So much at home that we decided to fill out a card expressing that we had interest to join. We'd both been brought up in churches, and now that we were married a couple of years, we wanted to get back to hearing God's Word." Sadly, Roy tells about a visit from the local pastor who told the young couple that they weren't welcome in the church as long as Roy sang country music. and in places other than the church. Now hold up. Assuming that we have all the details of this story, no, I'm not assuming Roy got it wrong, but let's think about it from a different angle. If I were a jazz artist or a rock artist, and I said I want to play for a polka band, that standard or style wouldn't fit. However, we're not talking about genres, are we? We're talking about a community, the church, that should welcome anyone. Yes, churches should welcome anyone. Also, concerts should let anyone in for the audience. Not that churches and concerts are the same. However, not anyone can stroll up on stage and play at a concert. Roy Clark knew that too. Jimmy Dean, another mainstream gospel recording artist, fired Roy for being late to one of his rehearsals. Now later, Dean and Clark, they reconciled and they were on stage again. But the church, Jimmy Dean, Broadway, wherever, reserves the right to allow individuals that they choose to be in a leadership position with the applicable standard and style. The real word here is standard. Clark and his wife should have never been denied access to the church, if that's what happened. However, this is where gospel music takes on more than talent. It should also involve character, correction, and heart. In other words, standard. And at any rate, we have a great album from Roy Clark with wonderful gospel songs. Jimmy Dean is probably a name that you associate with sausage. However, it was initially known for country music. Biography.com says Jimmy Ray Dean was born on August 10, 1928 in Oilton, Texas to working-class parents. Raised in Plainview, Texas, Dean's Depression-era upbringing saw him experience abject poverty. His father floated in and out of Dean's early life, and one time he had to slaughter the young boy's pet goat in order to put food on the table. His mother sewed clothes for Dean, and his siblings used sugar sacks for clothes that brought Dean up with heavy ridicule from his peers. Dean's only refuge from his difficult life was music. Strict Southern Baptist, Dean's family attended church every week, where Jimmy began singing in the choir. His mother also taught him to play the piano at age 10, and Dean picked up other instruments along the way, including the accordion, harmonica, and the guitar. In 1960, Jimmy Dean released a gospel album called Hymns by Jimmy Dean. Track 1 is entitled Near the Cross, but Dean opens it with a chorus called Give Me That Old-Time Religion. Many mainstream artists seem to hearken back to their Christian roots throughout the mid-20th century. The next vinyl is my favorite all-time mainstream gospel album and the first one I purchased over 20 years ago. Merle Haggard released an album in 1981 called Songs for the Mama That Tried. Now let's just pause for a moment and consider that title. According to Wikipedia, as a gospel album, it reached number 46 on the Billboard Country Album chart. The Country Music Hall of Fame says Merle Ronald Haggard was born poor, though not desperately so, in the Depression-era Bakersfield, California, to Jim and Flossie Haggard, migrants from Oklahoma. Jim, a railroad carpenter, died of a stroke in 1946, forcing Flossie to find work as a bookkeeper. Flossie, seen pictured on Haggard's album cover, was a fundamentalist Christian and a stern, somewhat overprotective mother. Her youngest child grew quickly rambunctious, and by his 21st birthday, Haggard had ran away from home a lot. He had been placed in 2 separate reform schools, from which he escaped a half a dozen times, worked as a laborer, played the guitar, sung informally, and began a family. He also performed sporadically at the Southern California clubs and for 3 weeks at the Smile and Jack 3 radio show in Springfield, Missouri. He had also spent time in local jails for theft and bad checks. I think the title speaks for itself. I personally love the style and the songs on this album. Our last vinyl today is How Great Thou Art, as sung by Elvis Presley, released in 1967. This one is actually still sealed. Graceland.com says the incredible Elvis Presley life story began when Elvis Aaron Presley was born to Vernon and Gladys Presley in a two-room house in Tupelo, Mississippi on January the 8th, 1935. His twin brother Jesse Guerin was stillborn, leaving Elvis to grow up as an only child. He and his parents moved to Memphis, Tennessee in 1948, and Elvis graduated from Humes High School there in 1953. Elvis's musical influences were the pop and country music of the time, the gospel music he had heard in church, and the all-night gospel sings he had frequently attended, as well as the black R&B that he absorbed on historic Beale Street as a Memphis teenager. In 1971, he released another gospel vinyl called You'll Never Walk Alone. The same year that he passed away, RCA released a vinyl called Elvis, His Songs of Inspiration. There are many more gospel vinyls that Elvis released during his career. All of these artists I mentioned had more gospel songs and vinyls during their lifetime, but these are the records that I have in my personal collection. Which mainstream gospel vinyl is your favorite? Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep putting the stylus down and turn it around. For Lost and Found Gospel Vinyl, I'm Kevin Vogele. I hope to see you soon.